So basically, it is no surprise or secret that we have actually launched this Galera Manager now for a couple of years actually. And one thing that's very interesting is that you can actually launch and operate clusters either in Amazon, on-premise, DigitalOcean, and you can manage, monitor. Obviously, the new thing is Percona XtraDB Cluster. So a very simple thing is, can you create a PXE in AWS or DigitalOcean? Can you provision on your existing instances? Can you manage an existing deployment? And how we compare to managed database as a service providers. So while we don't have any polls here, it might be interesting for you to take a note that we obviously can compete against DigitalOcean's managed services. Amazon has RDS and Amazon's Aurora, so they are typical competitors. But we expect that Galera Manager should be offered to you at a much cheaper rate than anything that you are normally already used to. So to answer your question, the answer is of course yes. You can deploy a fully managed cluster. You can deploy a cluster on user-provided hosts, and you can monitor an existing cluster. So of course, you require AWS EC2 account or DigitalOcean account. And the first option is the option that we obviously like the most, because you can manage the node as well as manage the host. What does that really mean? Managing the node means you manage the MySQL node of the deployment. And managing the host means you also be able to manage the Linux host. That means you can start an instance, stop an instance without issue. And you can also handle recovery. I think that is maybe one of the most interesting things. As you know, Galera is very, very robust. Once you set it up, it runs, it works, it tends to never stop. However, there can be issues sometimes. Maybe you have a network issue, maybe the instance that you've deployed on has gone away. And naturally, this would be problematic for you. And Galera Manager can actually attempt to repair the node for you, which is very, very uncommon in general. You can also, of course, deploy a cluster on user-provided hosts. What that means is you have existing machines. This is not only reserved for the cloud, naturally. This is for you to run in localhost, etc., without any issue. So you have maybe got 3 nodes with an operating system that we support, and we will actually deploy and install everything for you without issue. Unfortunately, we cannot then we can only monitor the host. We cannot manage the host. That means we can read information about CPU. We can read information about the memory, but we cannot, of course, do anything to the host as much as we would like, because it's not a fully managed instance. And then, of course, we have the monitor of the existing cluster, where we will only monitor the node and the host. We make full use of SSH, so you will have to enable SSH. And we also have now installed an agent, which is what we never had before. Currently, the agent is actually very, very simple in terms of a deployment, but soon we will expect it to do other actions because, as you know, when you have an SSH connection and if the connection breaks, so there's no replay of streams. So an agent can allow us to replay the streams, which is something we would like. So because deployment will take some time, it is obviously smart for me to start the deployment. So we will actually go naturally to have a little bit of a demo. So here we may be familiar with, and I will just click the launch instance button. I call it GMD because it's the Galera Manager, and I'm going to go pop on Ubuntu 20.04 because it's a reasonable setup. And here I'm just going to go for a T2 medium, and here's the login. Now here's something potentially interesting is that you can actually allow HTTPS traffic and HTTP traffic from the internet here now, in addition to the SSH traffic. So naturally, this is something we would pick, and I will just hit the launch instance button. Which says that I've launched an instance, which is good. Now you will need an API key to get all of this going. So first and foremost, we will SSH into it. Let's make this nice and large so you can see it. So we should do this as the root user. And when you want to download Galera Manager, you just need to go here. It does ask for an email, and it's pulling the download now. Of course, in the interest of time, I have a little script here that'll allow me to grab the entire GM. Then you have to make it executable. And then you get to see one thing you should do is probably check the version. You can also install, uninstall, upgrade. So we will do an install. Do we accept a license agreement? You can, of course, read said agreement if you'd like, but this is not necessary. So let's hit the accept button. You don't have a separate repository, so let's go for it. Admin user login. We're going to use the admin user. Enter a quick password. Here it'll ask you for a domain name. So we have one here. If you enter a domain, fully qualified domain, naturally what would happen is you would see that it will actually provide a Let's Encrypt SSL certificate for you. Of course, at the moment, you do not get this. So now it'll do an installation. This can of course take maybe 3-4 minutes. It really depends on how updated your instance tends to be. And of course, we can hop on over to even DigitalOcean to create some droplets we like. We can go for just for a quick test of one launch in an existing host. Again, this is Ubuntu 20.04. But I will not naturally push off a full cluster. I will just do I'll do one instance and show you that it can also install an existing host. So I'm creating a brand new host here for you. So very similar to what we just did here. Okay, so here we already have this. So I think the most important thing people tend to forget is that they do not open up these ports. So here is port 8081 in the firewall that we need to open up. And because that's the logs database URL. So once we go to EC2, we'll hit up the security group and we can hit the edit button, edit an inbound rule. That'll be for every CIDR block. All right, then we can go back to our EC2 dashboard. If you want to make doubly sure if this works, you can always visit that. Okay, so it does work. And now we can go straight to the site. We get a nice login page and we log on in. There's a rather strange note here where when you create things in the cloud, sometimes you get a host that is not responsive. Here is an example of a host that is not responsive. So we can actually just destroy. We'll give it one last chance. So yeah, sometimes you have to just destroy instances in the cloud because they don't actually run as planned. But that's, again, as I said, not a big deal because we can just make another. So this is, again, a very similar setup where I will install Galera Manager. Yep, and got to enter admin password again. And this was this node. So we let that happen as is. This is more a demo that we can actually deploy on an existing empty machine, which I will be able to log on soon too. So just so you know, if I typed MySQL here, it should of course not work because it is not there. I will keep this one in mind for later. So this is Galera Manager for you. Currently it tells you we have no clusters available, which is of course fully acceptable. So we can of course create our first cluster. And this is exactly what I showed you earlier in a screenshot. Please hit the deploy fully managed cluster option. I'm going to call it Percona. I'm going to call it XtraDB. And of course, I'm going to pick PXC8. And I'll pick Ubuntu 20.04 again. And I will pick the cloud provider being EC2. I want to reduce the database size to 10. And if you don't know how to get access to your API keys, all you have to do is go here, hit up security credentials, and then of course create an access key, and you will be able to download it as a CSV or copy and paste. So here I of course have already created one very recently. So it's connecting to make sure that you can actually deploy. And I will also pick EU Central 1. And here I will pick, you have a nice instance selector here. So if you do T2, you can get a T2 medium fairly quickly. Very importantly, you of course have base firewall rules. And this is important. And I'll explain why this port is added later. And you can also actually add your own SSH key if you want. So you can actually log on to your nodes, or you can use the SSH interface to log in. So I'm not going to add anything at the moment because I want to show you the SSH interface. Then I'll hit create. And almost immediately, you will actually notice that it would pop up that the cluster has been created and I'm now ready to add some nodes. So naturally, you want to have a 3-node Galera cluster. You'll notice that you can actually segment it because we actually support you running not just in one data center, you can actually run in multiple data centers. So you can actually deploy 3 nodes in EU Central 1, but you can also deploy nodes elsewhere. And even here, as you can see, you can change set of deployment as you please. So I'm going to deploy 3 nodes. In fact, if you look here very carefully, I only have 1 running instance. Fairly soon, I will have 3 running instances. So one pro tip I can give you is this is something that needs to be kept open. So I'll just make a new window to ensure that nothing goes wrong. And then I will head back again to this to see what's going on. It's still actually doing an install. So we let it do set install without issue. And then we start again the slides. So, Sakari already alluded to the fact that we are Codership. We are the developers and experts of Galera Cluster. We've been doing this since 2007. We follow a services business model. We make open source software. We have of course got a Galera Enterprise offering too. We have thousands of users and it's widely used, very well tested software for people who cannot tolerate any downtime, data loss, or lost transactions. And of course, I'd say it's fairly easy to use, very easy to set up, but many people actually even do fail at the setup stage. So which is why we actually built the Galera Manager, because Galera Manager is not just there to deploy, it's also there to monitor. And I think that is rather important. Yeah. So this is, I'd say it's good. And we've been making reliable software that has, we work very closely with the MariaDB. So there you get MariaDB Galera Cluster. And then we also make a very, very reliable software for MySQL 8. That's why we have MySQL 5.7 and MySQL 8. And then, of course, Percona, we don't work with them, but they make a rather popular server as well, which is what you're seeing here us deploy. But of course, what is Galera Cluster if you don't already know it? It's basically a virtually synchronous replication solution. It it's highly scalable, so you can add nodes or delete nodes on the fly. From your application point of view, it looks like one very large big database. You can, of course, have basically HA with no single point of failure. We require a minimum of 3 nodes because we follow what is known as quorum-based failure handling. So if in a quorum, you need a majority. So a majority would constitute 2/3, for example. But if you only have 2 nodes, there's no majority available. Then 50% doesn't constitute a majority. This can cause a split brain situation because both nodes say, "Hey, we're actually kind of alive," and no one else can arbitrate between that. So that's kind of handy too. Of course, we have optimistic concurrency control. We're fully multi-master cluster, all nodes equal in terms of having data. So, no lagging secondaries, parallel replication, and we don't need any frameworks for you to do failovers or designate nodes for writes and the rest for reads. Configuration is simple, very easy to handle, scheduled, downtime. So some firewall nodes, of course, and this is all taken care of with you for Galera Manager. SSH for login. TCP for MySQL is 306, 3060 is for clone SST, which you can only use in MySQL 8. Doesn't work in MariaDB, doesn't work in Percona server. So it's a MySQL 8 thing at the moment. TCP ports for Galera Cluster need to be opened as well. 4444, 4567, 4568. And of course, there's UDP port for Galera Cluster as well. So these are a few things that you normally have to open up. Similarly with SE Linux, you can open up these via SE Manage. But again, Galera Manager will ensure you don't have to ever muck with SE Linux or the firewall. It's meant to do everything automatically for you. So I'd say it's good to note that Galera Manager itself is free graphical user interface for provisioning Galera clusters on AWS, EC2, and DigitalOcean. It's fully part of Galera Cluster Enterprise Edition. So if you are enterprise subscriber, you also get access to this in addition to already being free, but you get, I guess, support. You can create clusters, you can segment nodes for geo-distributed cluster creation across multiple regions, as I already mentioned earlier. That's why we have the segment option. 0, 1, 2 is totally okay for you. You can add and remove nodes. So when it comes to monitoring charts, we have over 620 metrics. And unfortunately, this is actually hard-coded. So from a Percona XtraDB cluster standpoint, things like ISD status is not something that you will take into consideration. But this is something that will be fixed soon. So one thing I can tell you is Galera Manager is being actively developed, and you can file feature requests and bugs without issue. It's fully web-based in browser to administer and monitor your clusters. We support MariaDB 10.3, 10.4, 10.5, 10.6. It's a long list of MariaDBs. MySQL 5780, and of course the new one being Percona XtraDB Cluster. OS support also, there's Dev 11, 12, RHEL 8, Ubuntu, CentOS, etc. And it's probably worth noting that previous incarnations of Galera Manager used to also work with things like Amazon Linux too, but the OS checker has gotten a bit more serious, and it doesn't actually install on Amazon Linux too now at the moment because it's not a supported OS. And we've had, of course, people request Alma Linux, etc. Too. So very simple. Why PXE? It's of course user requests, and so far because it's new, and unless more users request it, it is kind of a second-class citizen because it is, as I said, very new. But it will shortly become a first-class citizen as as more users request it and as more people install and beat at it and report issues. So I'd say at this stage it's quite possible that we have some nodes already installed, and if we actually hop onto the SSH terminal, we should be able to log on to MySQL, and you'll notice that of course we have this here. Yeah, it's proper 8034. And it's truly a 3-node Galera cluster. You have, of course, full access to. So you can actually obviously look at your GRE state.dat and your GVW state.dat, and of course it is fully SSL based. To be very clear, Percona XtraDB Cluster by default actually is configured with SSL, so it is secure out of the box. And one thing that's different is, of course, there is a auth socket to allow you to log in here now without any password username. So here's your SSH terminal at its best. Now, I did mention that we can also deploy this really quickly on an existing node, so I want to show that to you too. So again, I'm going to deploy one on a user host, so this is the second option. And here we go to the host system. I believe it was 2004. It's going to ask me to install an SSH key. As I said, all of this happens over SSH. And if I'm not mistaken, as I said, this was the instance. There's no MySQL at the moment. So let's just do this. And say that I've added it. I'm not going to create 3 nodes here. In the interest of time, I'll just make 1 node. And we'll call this node 1. And copy that IP. Check the access. Looks good. Hit the deploy. And we will soon be able to type MySQL, and we should be able to log in. But before we do that, we'll get back to the presentation because I think we have about little less than 10 more minutes. So, price comparisons. DigitalOcean has a high availability solution that can give you standby nodes, 2 standby nodes. But now you can only do this either in a CPU optimized or storage optimized instance. And there are connection limits when you apply them. CPU equivalent comparison is about 84 per Galera cluster node. So I obviously used something similar with 2 vCPUs, 8 gigabytes of RAM, and about $12 for the Galera node, Manager node. So saving you some 30% in cost. And I think that's a minimum. You can actually go much cheaper with Galera Manager. What about Amazon? Amazon is really, really interesting in the sense that it is far from cheap. So I used the EC2 instances again. The 1686 is just for one instance. For ease of use, let's just go right ahead and multiply that by 4, and you more or less at $67.44 a month on average for your test instance. A similar test instance on RDS with multi-AZ is comparison at about 128. So at $67, you're about 90% cheaper with Galera Manager, 3 Galera cluster nodes, or even 214% cheaper than Aurora. There's plenty of competition out there. Percona Monitoring and Management monitors. It deploys Kubernetes. I'm not sure how many of you fancy with regards to Kubernetes, but if you just wanted simple nodes to be deployed, that's not what PMM does at the moment. It is free and open source, so of course, I think you can keep on adding to it if you'd like. Cell lines cluster control monitors, deploys, but costs money. I can't really tell you how much, but it's probably not as cheap as you'd expect. And that's one of the major things we hear is people say we really like to use Galera Manager because it's actually free. So this is a PXC, Percona XtraDB Cluster, and you'll notice that it also has, you can actually monitor the cluster size here, which you can also do in Galera Manager. Tells you what your flow control pause time is, etc. All of these are little dashboards that you can keep on adding, and it's also very similar to what's available inside of Galera Manager because these are all just retrieving statistics straight out of your MySQL server, and then of course being stored in a metric server. In the PXC standards, it's in PXC, and with regards to Galera Manager, we use Influx. So this is basically stuff that you can add or remove from your from what you want to monitor from the dashboard. Also, of course, there's received transactions, replicated, and so forth. I guess, as I said, one of the most interesting things that PXC has that no other MySQL at the moment has is IST progress, incremental state transfer progress, and this is not exposed at the moment in Galera Manager, but it will be. And of course, the ability to inspect with more granular feature set, be it the data or statistics or even getting this as JSON output, is quite nice. It is not as granular inside of Galera Manager as one would expect, but I think that is something that we can all work towards too. So if I again now type MySQL, you'll realize that I actually have connected. It has already installed MySQL for me. And I should have one node because I only deployed one node. And of course we are connected. So that's node 1 and no data yet. And you can actually keep on deploying things like node 2, etc. So I can just literally go back up here again and add a node. But I didn't create an instance for it. So that's more or less, and as I said earlier, you can just add other charts as you please. So you can just add things like that and so forth. Okay, so that's a bit about what you could do with Galera Manager. That's how you can deploy and of course monitor Galera Manager with Galera Manager. And what really comes next is upgrading in place. We think that's something a lot of users would like very much, is to basically sit there and say, I'd like to move from 5.7 to 8.0, which is why we haven't deprecated 5.7. You can still deploy 5.7. Things like pruning logs. So far, we have log retention of 30 days, and this is not something that you can configure, but want to maybe prune it or even save it longer. Saving and loading of configuration and metrics is something we fully expect to happen. And of course, bug fixes. Maybe one of the most exciting places for you to be is our GitHub, where we actually allow you to file plenty of issues, and we also close plenty of issues. So highly recommend you check this out. We actually fully expect that you would send your requests there, because that's a choice of where you'd report bugs and feature requests. I believe, of course, naturally, we have some time for a bit of questions. So you can type them in the question panel, and we can answer them for you. So I mean, we have about 3 more minutes left, so kept the demo tight. And of course, not to be remiss, but to also show you that this was initially just one node. Now, of course, you should see 4 because 3 Galera cluster nodes were installed as well. So as you can see, Galera Manager has these. But yes, definitely open to any questions you may have in the next 3 minutes. Otherwise, thank you for attending as well. I don't know if you would, you see how easy it is. It would seem that you should totally just install it, like try it, give it a go, write feedback about Galera Manager. Tell us what you could do, what you would like from Galera Manager.